Welcome to Produce Talks.
This whole business is based on relationship and friendships.
Food is darn simple.
What can we do? What are other countries doing?
How important it is for industry to be talking about this.
We're going back to the farm. We're going back to the whole food.
Hello and welcome to Produce Talks, the CPMA podcast. This episode is part 2 of our 2-part series, Produce and Politics, taking a look at the new minority government and what it means for the fresh produce sector in Canada. This episode is being recorded on Thursday, January 23rd, 2020. I'm going to be passing over the moderator reins very shortly for this episode to David Coletto of Abacus Data for a roundtable discussion with pundits representing the Liberal, Conservative, and NDP parties. But first, a quick word about our Farm to Plate advocacy event happening in February. On February 25th, the Canadian Produce Marketing Association and the Canadian Horticulture Council will be holding our annual Farm to Plate advocacy event on Parliament Hill. This will be our first opportunity to meet with the new class of members of Parliament, as well as with senators and senior government officials. And we know it is crucial that the produce industry engages early with the new parliament to maximize our impact in government decision-making. And here's the great part. If you're a CPMA or CHC member, you can come and attend. Our Farm to Plate event will allow our members to share their priorities directly with elected officials and build strong relationships with key policymakers in Ottawa. This event will be followed later in the year by our annual Fall Harvest event, which has become a fixture on the calendar of many parliamentarians over the past number of years. These advocacy events are one of the ways that CPMA works to ensure that the needs and priorities of our members are at the center of effective government policy. To register for Farm to Plate or for more information, head to CPMA/events to learn more.
So in part 1 of CPMA's podcast on the political and policy implications for the fresh produce sector, Ian and I talked about the political landscape of the new minority government. And today, I'm pleased to be joined from some Ottawa insiders to talk about what this new minority parliament means and some of the big issues facing the produce sector as this new government and the new opposition parties move forward. I'm joined today by Caitlin McClung. She's a director at StrategyCorp and our resident Liberal pundit and strategist today. Howard Mains, who's managing principal from Tactix Government Relations and Public Affairs. He will be our resident Conservative. And last but not least, Cameron Holmstrom, a consultant at Bluesky Strategy Group. He is our New Democrat around the table. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure to have you here. So, we started the new year, Parliament's set to resume again, and I want to first get everybody's take on the current political landscape as it stands in Canada now. What should we expect from this minority government, for example? First, maybe give us your perspective on how minority governments might be a little bit different from the majority governments we've had over the last 2 cycles, how decisions are made, how Parliament might work in this kind of environment, and any sense of what seems to be an increasing regional divide in our country. I mean, national unity questions seem to be off the table for quite some time. They seem to be back on. And how is that playing out in sort of the town today and the way the government and the opposition parties are going to approach that? Maybe, Caitlin, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, thank you, everyone, for having us here today. It's back to business next week. And I think since the election, nobody has really understood what back to business actually means for a minority government. So the House is back. You're going to have all the leaders fighting for airtime, and the machinery of government's going to start to kick in. And as you noted, that's different in a minority setting. The House, committees, individual members, they really set the agenda, and that's going to be a bit of a change for this government in particular, although, the mandate letters read as though they're governing as if it's a majority. When it comes down to actually doing the work, they're going to have to switch focus and start leaning across the aisle and leaning on those committees in order to get their agenda through.
Right. And Howard, I mean, building off of what Caitlin said, there's this additional wrinkle, I guess, in Canadian politics now is that the main opposition party, the Conservatives, are now into a full-on leadership race. How does that add to the uniqueness of a minority government when it comes to the politics and policy development process that might be happening over the next few months?
Well, let me just agree with what Caitlin said, which is we now have a parliament that matters. And in the past, when you had majority governments, parliament didn't matter as much as what they should. So members of parliament will be finding their feet and exercising their due diligence at the committee level. I think when it comes to the Conservatives, I think it's only just a temporary aberration over the course of the next 6 months as they choose their new leader. That process will wind up in 6 months, and then they'll get back at it. So I think the bigger issue, though, is that for all of us is to watch the Bloc Québécois and the influence that they play. That, to me, is the one that we really need to keep an eye on, and what influence that the Bloc Québécois caucus will have. I'm
going to hold this till later in the podcast, but I'm going to get you all on record to say who you think the next Conservative leader is going to be. But Cam, from the NDP's perspective, right, you saw, one of the outcomes of the election was the party lost almost half its caucus, but in lieu of that, it now has probably more influence over this parliament than it did in the previous one with a larger caucus. What's the NDP's role in all of this? And if you have anything else to add about, minority parliaments and the way that parliament works in that sense too.
Well, when it comes to the minority parliament piece, I think you saw a real good, got a real good taste of that on Monday when the Special Committee on Canada-China Relations sat down, and you saw a 2.5-hour meeting over very mundane, basic rules of basically running a committee, and just kind of the fight back and forth with a little piece of language here and there, and everyone trying to find their space to kind of get a bit more of an advantage. That's the cut and thrust of minority parliament. We haven't seen that for a while, and I think that's going to be something that's obviously people have to get used to again. When it comes to the NDP side of things, I think what's interesting is I was there in 2015 after we fell from official opposition down to where we were, and the mood was very somber for a very long time. Having spoken to people who have been there, who were there after this move, it's a very different mood. I think people recognized that last time for those new MPs who came in, for the new group that came in, it was a lost term because they never really had the chance to basically, enjoy the fact that they were there, that they had arrived, they were being a part of our democracy. And they've really gone out of their way to do more team building this time and to kind of build forward. And that's been remarkable to me. Like one of the things they did right away was they did a big mass swearing in ceremony for almost all their new MPs. I've never seen that from this group. But when I saw it, you could just see this energy of okay, we realize where we are, but we actually see a path forward now. And I think for some people going into the campaign, they didn't necessarily see the path forward, what it looked like. When it comes to the actual parliamentary situation, to my mind, the next 6 months are going to be a bit of a wash because of the Conservative leadership race. I honestly think we're going to see something similar to what happened in the last minority with Mr. Ignatieff when he rose to leadership. This kind of period of obviously not wanting to take down the government, but not wanting to roll over. So it's going to be, I think, a lot of votes against without a full caucus in the room to ensure that this thing doesn't get triggered. And I think for the government, it's going to be interesting to see if they decide to take advantage of that opportunity to move things forward or not. And I do agree with Howard about the Bloc, because the Bloc are the ultimate wild card. Their goals in this are totally different. Yves-François Blanchet made it clear. He sees no reason why this shouldn't go 4 years. They don't want to go back to an election. They have zero incentive to do it. There are certain issues that obviously Quebecers care about a lot, and they're going to be hard on those issues. But unlike the national parties who have to play to all parts of the country, there are going to be issues that the Bloc will have to vote on that they frankly could care less about. And they will use that as a bargaining chip. They'll use that they will trade that in to get support on something else. Mm-hmm. And it creates these very odd situations that people don't necessarily account for. So I think the Bloc is going to be the wild card in all this and how they react.
And we can already see, one food policy area that they've already taken credit for is the compensation paid to dairy farmers. As an example, right out of the gate, they were able to say, because we're here, the government followed through on its commitment. And that's proof why we need more Bloc MPs.
And they've actually put a supply management critic in their caucus, right, which I've never seen anyone do.
So, since even the start of this new year, right, we're only 3 weeks in, and so much has happened in the world that seems to have enveloped Ottawa, right? We've had the tragedy with the plane crash in Iran. You've got the conflict between the U.S. and Iran. You've got, now we'll talk about later, CUSMA on the verge of being ratified by all three countries, and what looks like a potential pandemic or outbreak, at least in China. So these big global issues have the tendency sometimes to overtake domestic policy priorities. Given what's happened, say, even in the first 3 weeks of this year, what are you seeing as the early signals to where the agenda of this parliament might be? We had a throne speech before Christmas. Has anything changed in this short period of time?
Well, I'm reminded by the wise words of a prime minister of the UK a few decades ago, and he said something to the effect of, "Events, my dear, events." And a government's ability to handle events as they crop up really show the strength of what I call the warp and the weave of the government. And in the past, we've seen governments being able to handle these events which crop up and need to be addressed in a proper and meaningful way. And that will be the test of this government as to how it's able to address these in the fullness of time to the satisfaction of Canadians. And if they don't do that, it's at their peril.
And I think we released a survey recently that looked at sort of the approval rating of the government, how people are feeling about the prime minister, and we've seen a decline in negative impressions, right? So in these first few weeks, maybe month and a half of this new government, it's clear that the prime minister himself, that the government is taking a different tone, a different tact with how it approaches it, and Canadians aren't falling back in love yet with Justin Trudeau, but it seems to be starting to bear, I think, some fruit, because that the intensity of the negativity outside of Alberta and Saskatchewan seems to be dissipating a little bit, and I don't know whether that continues or that's just a reaction to, I think, what even our poll showed. Many people reacted positively to the way that the Prime Minister handled the tragedy in Iran. Caitlin, thoughts from the Liberal perspective on that?
Yeah, no, I was going to cite that as well, that, the PM's negatives are down. I don't think he's using the tragedy in order to improve his personal numbers. That's not what it is. That's not what this is about. But I do think that he's at his best. And Canadians see him at his best when he's interacting one-on-one and he's given the opportunity to be compassionate. And I think that that's happened over the last couple of weeks, and it's really resonating with the public. Also, he's taken a step back. He's allowed his team to be front and center, and I think Canadians are happy to see that and are happy to see that there's a strong team around him. Next week, issues are going to continue to pop up, and it will be interesting to see the messaging and how he manages that, if he takes a step back in questioning period and allows whether they're seasoned ministers or new ministers to answer directly as it relates to their track record. We'll see that a little bit, but I think the putting the team front and center, having a more of a humane one-on-one interaction with Trudeau, it's working.
So I'll get your thoughts in a minute, Cameron. So setting the agendas is what CPMA, other associations are trying to do, get their issues onto the agenda. And, when we think of agriculture and its impact on the broader economy, it's pretty clear that, the produce sector alone had an estimated economic impact of almost $14 billion in real GDP, supporting over 180,000 jobs. In 2016. So just this week, we heard that there was an RFP coming out from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada about a campaign that they want to run, spending upwards of $5 million a year to encourage Canadians to buy and eat local Canadian-produced food. So there appears to be some focus on this. What do we anticipate based on these early days that how the parties might approach agriculture and agri-food more generally, but specifically the produce sector? What role, if any, can we see emerging out of this so far? Maybe I'll start with you, Cameron, on that.
Well, I think the big thing right away is that obviously for this government, in the minority, you're always looking for ways you can reach across the table to find common ground. And I think one of the areas where you can see common ground between at least two, but more likely three of the parties in the House, is when it comes to food policy, when it comes to healthy eating, promoting healthy lifestyle, and all those things. And the Buy Canadian Food, I found that very interesting that they're coming out with that. I think it's a good idea. I just find it interesting that because we've had provincial governments promote different food products. BC and wine comes to mind for me right away, and that landed in the WTO. I think the fact that the WTO dispute mechanism is basically dead in the water right now because the Americans refuse to actually appoint judges makes it interesting, because now you can go ahead of the policy like this, and where's the fallout? It's an interesting situation that we find ourselves. It tests to where we're at in the world right now when it comes to this kind of thing.
Howard, it seems to me the politics of this is interesting as well, right? If you look at the makeup of the Liberal caucus in particular, one of the outcomes of the election was they lost many of, if they had many left, rural MPs. Give me a sense of, is this political in a way? Is this new seemingly focus on food and agriculture new, or is it just simply what we should be talking about given Canada's opportunity here in this, not just the produce sector, but beyond as well?
So maybe a few proof points. The first proof point is that the four most lobbied members of Parliament in 2019 were current Minister of Agriculture, the Member of Parliament for Glengarry Prescott Russell, the Chair of the Finance Committee, who's a huge supporter of agriculture, and then, of course, the Chair of the Agriculture Committee. So I think it's fair to say that agriculture and agri-food are punching above their weight in getting their story across to the Liberal caucus, as it were, before the election. Now, the other thing is that there were 14 rural MPs that were lost, 14 rural constituencies that were Liberals. They were lost. And I haven't looked at the map to refresh my memory as to where those were. But they do realize that they have lost ground, they being the Liberal caucus. So they appreciate that. When it comes to the $25 million program, that was approved in last year's budget. I think I have a bit of a different view about if I had the $25 million and where I would spend it. I would spend it on building trust in our Canadian food system. So the sector, the produce sector, is part of a value chain that puts on the tables of Canadians 100 million meals a day safely. Seldom do you hear of foodborne illnesses in Canada that strike a wide path. And I think what's lacking is that there's lacking a bit of trust in our food system. And if I was the person determining where to spend that $5 million a year, I would use it to underscore the safety that we have in our very robust food inspection system that allows Canadians to enjoy good, healthy, safe food each day.
So I want to focus on a few areas that the produce sector is particularly engaged on right now. One of them, and I think that the government is clearly engaged on this, sustainability and the green economy, right? Clear, coming out of the election, big focus on climate change and sustainability. The throne speech had a lot on that. You had Finance Minister Morneau talking about how the budget is also likely going to be maybe viewed through a green lens and what different parts of government and different tools government has to sort of encourage this transition that I think they're really focused on. It's also clear, in the work that we've done with CPMA and CPMA is very focused on sustainable solutions that the produce supply chain can deliver, right? We're talking about plastics, we're talking about food waste. From a policy perspective, looking across the political spectrum, do we see the parties, what's the party's approach to this issue, I think? And what are likely the parties going to bring to the table, either in new ideas, in contesting what the government's likely going to move on? How do we see this interplay moving forward? I'll start with you, Caitlin, on that one.
Yeah, so just to build off of what Howard was saying, there's a lot of opportunity with this government, and not just because of the minority situation that we're in, but also because of the policies or the commitments that are already in place. So you go back to the 2019 budget, which is front and center in the relevant ministers and departments' mandate letters, that there's a commitment to acting on a national food policy. So I think that this government's going to continue in that direction, and sustainability is going to be one of the lenses that the sector can continue to push their agenda through. Just going back to some of the asks, and all the government council, that makes sense, especially from a sustainability perspective. It can't just be one department out there pushing a single agenda. So I do think the sector can continue to speak the same language that the government needs them to speak in order for there to be more wins coming down the line. And sustainability is definitely an area that the Liberals want to see things through. It appeals to the Bloc. It appeals to the NDP. It appeals to the Greens. Kind of appeals to everyone but the Conservatives. And I think they're going to be forced to answer to that over the next couple of months. One last thing, just in terms of machinery and more opportunities, even though there's going to be a leadership race that's playing out every day in the media, there's still a budget process right now that's underway, and lots of opportunity to help define this budget. The Liberals are going to act as if they only have two. Mm-hmm. And so, now's the time to help shape that and turn this into opportunity, not just for the sector, but for all Canadians.
And the minister said himself, finance minister, that he's not necessarily afraid to turn the taps on if needed, if the economy starts to appear that it's slowing down. And we had the Bank of Canada this week say maybe an interest rate cut's on the board. So, Howard, from the perspective of the risks and the opportunities that exist for the produce sector, given this, what appears to be clear agenda setting on this issue for the government, what's your take on even how the sector needs to approach this issue, appear, and what story does it have to tell about the work it's doing and its commitment to some of these issues?
Well, I think you hit on a key word there, story. And any of us that have been around Ottawa are always amazed when we hear about how government decision makers are made by good stories. And of course, the best storyteller of all time was just laid to rest last week with John Crosby. Building on that, the produce sector has some tremendous stories about what it is doing to achieve environmental goals. And with this government, if you are not demonstrating concrete actions to address climate change, then you might as well be talking to a barn door. Mm. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity there for the produce sector and the agri-food sector writ large to take advantage of opportunities that are there. There is a commitment on the government, for example, to see that over a course of 10 years that 2 billion trees will be planted. There's actually, if you look closely at the policy or other measures, there's a tremendous opportunity there for agriculture to step in and say, here's what we're doing across agriculture, and being able to demonstrate that the measures that, whether it's the produce sector or the agriculture sector more broadly, there are measures that are being taken that they are able to sequester carbon. So there's a great opportunity there for the produce sector to tell its story in a grand way and get some positive actions.
Cam, thoughts?
Well, I like how Howard reads that one last piece, because to me, a fruit tree is a tree. And I think of certain parts of the country, whether it be the Niagara Peninsula or the interior of British Columbia, where you see big fruit growers, and that is an opportunity. The other thing here, I think the policy-wise, to look at this, is looking for opportunities where obviously government's promoting things, but also, again, where that partnership can come other parties. And one that comes to me right away is Northern Indigenous communities. We've seen this government kind of tinkering with the Nutrition North program and trying to get more nutritious food into Northern and Indigenous communities. And I believe there is a role for producers to play in that and how they go about it. And we are seeing some innovation around that. But I believe any proposal that has a lens towards that is something that would look very well upon by this government. And I'll just come back to it. The sustainability is a big thing, but also I think it comes back to the idea, like measures that can be that the other parties can take credit for, go back to their members and say, hey, we've accomplished something. I think that's one of the big pressures of the minority. And majority, if you're an opposition party, not very often you get to say, hey, I did this. Whereas in this situation, a minority, you have those opportunities for you to be able to go back to your voters and say, here's what we delivered for you. And when I think of things like reduction of packaging, or again, reduction of food waste, or and all those things. Those are areas where I know the NDP specifically had policy on in this last campaign that are opportunities to kind of pick and choose from there to see how you can match these things up and get it across the line.
Huge opportunity for the sector to start to, build coalitions that make it easy for this government to just say yes.
And I think that's the one big thing in minority parliament I think people need to remember is that it is a lot more of the smaller idea, because to get a big idea and a big program through in a situation like this is very difficult, and to get it all the way to the end. But if you can find those quick, easier, put together solutions that pack a punch, they're very attractive in these situations, and parties are looking for those.
We're going to take a short break right now and come back to some topics that are particularly important to the sector right after this.
Hello everyone, it's Ray Warwick here from Nature Fresh Farms in Leamington, Ontario. As we continue through the new year, we see new opportunity and certainty for the supply chains of the produce industry. Nature Fresh Farms is dedicated to remaining integrated in all its operations to benefit both Canadian consumers and producers alike. To learn more about our greenhouse farms and the products we grow, visit us at naturefresh.ca.
One of the areas where, when we talk about climate change, sustainability, plastics is been a real focus. The government announced that by 2021 it wants to implement a ban on certain types of single-use plastics. And we've seen China and other jurisdictions talking about this in clear ways. So let's just quickly sort of explore, because it's a really important issue for the sector, right? CPMA has already moved fairly aggressively on an initiative to understand how the industry and sector sort of approaches this. We've done some research with the public to understand the nuances of what they want and how they see the issue, which is far more nuanced and complicated than it appears. And I suspect that's true of the policy area itself. Any insights on how the industry should react to this and what insight they should consider as they continue to sort of put their voice into this debate? Howard, I'll start with you.
Well, I think it comes back to that art form of storytelling. In the produce sector, there is an incredible story to be told in a couple of areas. First is when it comes to food waste. And if you take a look at how produce is packaged using a minimal amount of plastic, which is fully recyclable, that produce comes through the distribution chain and gets to the retail counter with minimal damage, so that when the consumer is able to take that produce home, put it in their refrigerator, it lasts a long time. Without some form of packaging, and plastic is the most efficient, that's not going to happen. The second thing is that the types of plastic that are the sector is using, that's going to have to be rationalized and with fewer types, so that the recycling and the full life cycle management of those plastics is simplified. So there's two things to do. One, get that benefit story told, because it's a tremendous benefit story between reducing food waste and improving food quality and reducing the potential for harm. And two, getting the story out about increasing the recyclability of the products that are used.
And one of the things that I think the consumer research we did and the value of that is never forgetting that at the same time, a Canadian is both a voter and a citizen who has policy priorities, but is also a consumer who has preferences for, as you said, fruit that isn't damaged, fruit that lasts longer in the fridge, right? That's easily portable. So it's so much more complicated and nuanced than that. From a political perspective, when we look at this parliament, is there pressure going to come from opposition benches for the government to not just fulfill its promise or its commitment, but maybe could we see them pushing them to go farther?
I do think so, because even with the ban on single-use plastics to begin with, that was a response to push from the NDP in the last parliament on microplastics and other things, where the NDP made a very conscious choice around 2016 to really push on that issue. I think the interesting thing as well is that we may be Canadians, but we're also citizens of a whole world where products are coming from all over, and we are seeing other jurisdictions act, and those actions will have repercussions on us. If a nation like China, for example, decides to do away with single-use plastics, that will not only affect what we sell there, but what they ship our way. And I think honestly, I think there's also that consumer movement too. Like I look at my own family at home. My wife loves to shop at Bulk Barn, and she always brings her own containers in. She refuses to go and get the plastic baggie. She said, no, I'm going to do this. And actually, it's my daughter, who's 7, who hectors us the most on this. Like, do you really need that bag? It's part of what's becoming a part of the society. So I think there is a natural push that's coming. And on the other side of it, we're also, frankly, we're seeing change. We're seeing the effects on our waste disposal systems. We had the whole case with the Philippines with stuff we thought was being recycled that wasn't being recycled, being shipped back. Malaysia just did the same thing this week. And we're even seeing municipalities talking about how they manage their own recycling services, because not everyone's recycling the same stuff or can recycle the same stuff, and they're trying to figure out how to handle all this. So some people would say that the easiest way to help that problem was to not have something to recycle to begin with. So I think right now one big thing is that you're seeing a conversation happening between producers, consumers, governments about how it is at all levels, how it is we deal with these things. So I think there's going to be a conversation happening in Ottawa, but I think that's also going to be involving the provinces and municipalities about not just what we buy, but where does it go through our waste stream and how does that get dealt with? And so having a voice at that table, as CPMA is trying to do, to inform, because I think one of the things, so much misinformation about this, lack of understanding of how this system actually works, right? And this balancing between food waste, affordability, and our desire to see the environment protected and climate change dealt with. Well, I think one thing that's happened, I think a lot of people, right? And you talked about the consumer piece earlier. A lot of people assume, okay, I put my plastic bag in the blue box, it's going out, it's being taken care of, and I've done a good thing. So I think the stories that we've had come back about what happened, the one in the Philippines, for example, just the one that keeps coming back, that made a lot of people think, like, wait a minute, my thing didn't get recycled, I didn't do the good thing. It all of a sudden made people think about decisions that they thought they were already making in good faith. So it opens up a whole new discussion. The only thing I'll add is that some municipalities are already there. Toronto recently launched a campaign, and using the Raptors play-by-play announcer, get that garbage out of here, because there's a whole educational campaign that needs to happen. Who's responsible for what? The consumer, what level of government, and where does everyone all fit in? And I think the industry can really play a large role on clarifying that and pushing all levels of government to help solve this together. So let's shift gears again and talk about labor. Like many other sectors in the country right now, there's a crisis really when it comes to accessing skilled labor in agriculture across the country. That's, the labor gap in horticulture is becoming quite serious. When you think about the programs that exist, the policy change that likely has to happen, right? The temporary foreign workers program, agricultural stream, the seasonal agriculture workers program, they're vital to the industry, but are politically challenging programs. Research we did with CPMA shows that 2/3 of Canadians support programs for foreign workers in agriculture, but there's other complications around that. So when we think about this issue in particular, how best do you think the government can support the sector in its labor shortage challenge? And what are the barriers to foreign labor in particular in this sector, given that, as much as we might try to convince more and more Canadians that working in the sector is something they'd want to do, it's clear not a lot of Canadians want to do this, and there's not a lot of free hands to do it, given that the unemployment rate is still so low. Who's got the magic bullet? Okay. I'll jump in on this just because I just kind of build off something Howard said earlier about stories. And having worked for MPs from agricultural areas, we don't tend to hear a lot of good stories about the program. There are good stories. We know there are good stories. We know there are good employers who treat their employees well and they come in and they keep coming back. We know there are good situations. we don't tend to hear the good stories. We tend to hear the bad stories. We tend to hear about those that do not treat the workers well or hold their passports or whatever there may be. And we know there are organizations that organize around that for those workers. I think part of the issue is just that, is that part of that story needs to be shared to help not necessarily change people's minds, but to show that, you know what, there are good people doing good things with this program. And it is meeting a need. It absolutely is meeting a need. And there are communities that are very dependent on this program to keep their industries going. Because that's true. The fact is that there's not a lineup of people willing to go and work in that sector. And it doesn't matter the rate of pay. You know, it's not easy work. It's not somebody like someone like myself who's got a bad back and bad knees and is 40 years old and overweight. Me going to pick tomatoes in a field is not going to work if that's where I was at in my life. And that's just the cold hard truth of the matter. I think the one thing as well with this when it comes to the programs is I think for a lot of Canadians, there's this idea, at least part of the myth that are the forming of our country is that you've come here to earn your life, to be a part of our society, and that, you know, if you've got the right to it, you should be able to come and stay and build your life and be a part of the society. And I think for some people, part of the block is this idea that you're here, quote unquote, temporary, that you come here, you do a job, you go home, and you may never get to come back. And I think if I were to offer a suggestion on how to tweak that program in some way, shape, or form, it would be for it to make it easier for those workers to be able to gain permanent residency, be able to stay in the country, bring their families, still work in that industry, but the idea of being able to come and be a part of our society. So, and I think that for some maybe the block, but I think the big thing is the story. People don't see the good stories. They don't see the good things that are done. And I think that's part of what can be worked upon. I'm
completely agree with Cameron here. Unfortunately, you know, the economic impact and the numbers speak for themselves. But when you get into issues around labor and immigration, optics and issues pop up, and they tend to cloud any rational decision making. And it happened with a previous government. You know, Kenny couldn't even get this right. So it's not just something that the Liberals are struggling with or will continue to struggle with. And
just to clear for our listeners, you mean Minister Jason Kenney is now the Premier of Alberta. He was Immigration Minister under Mr. Harper's government.
Yeah, and he made tweaks that, you know, weren't received as well as they hoped. You have a new minister, Marco. I think he's seen as a bit more of a retail politician. He's going to be out there. He wants to meet people. He wants the good stories. There's a new opportunity for the sector to level set a little bit and make sure that the impact and the positive news get those employers out there who have a really good story to tell. You know, get them in front of the minister to explain some of the challenges that they currently have. And I think, you know, whether it results in the changes that the sector is asking for, I don't know. It's a tough topic. I don't have a crystal ball, but at the very least, you'll probably at least be able to level set, start over on this issue with a new minister. And I think it will create goodwill that will pay off down the line.
Howard, we've seen, agriculture, produce is not the exception here. There's a lot of other sectors that are having the same kinds of challenges. We saw recently the Ontario government just rolled out an ad campaign by the Ministry of Labour trying to get people to reconsider the trades because of the same kind of shortages in the trades. From a federal government perspective, my sense is, and you can either challenge me or agree with me, I'm open to either, is that the Liberal government in particular, if you're watching from the outside, it appears they don't kind of care about people who work in these kinds of sectors. They're so focused on the innovation, they're so focused on the knowledge economy that if you drive a truck, if you pick fruit, if you pack fruit, if you do any of the things that this industry relies on, this government doesn't really think about you. Do you think that is true? And is that changing here in Ottawa? Like, do they recognize that might be an issue for them?
I think that's a comment that could be fairly stated 4 years ago. In our business, we work with the manufacturing sector, specifically the agricultural equipment manufacturing sector, and I'll just say that we saw some frustrations there in terms of this is 4 years ago, just being able to be heard because there seemed to be this bias against what I'll call classic manufacturing and it wasn't that those nice new shiny jobs in software development labs in downtown Vancouver. I'm simplifying the argument, of course, but that was the perception. So I think we've moved away from that. We've witnessed it in our discussions with caucus members over the past number of years. And one of the things I was surprised about just before Christmas, I went and visited a farm just outside of Ottawa, a brother and sister who are, early 30s, and she looks after the dairy cattle and he looks after the crops. And I was start off life as a dairy farmer, and I was just amazed about the amount of data that they have to process in terms of making management decisions. And so whether you're the manager of a farm or if you're a worker on a farm or these days, you really have to have a skill set that allows you to make decisions based on a lot more data points than it used to be. You can't get onto a farm and it's not like the old days. Well, it's much different.
It's interesting you mention that because you talk about the trades and the view of it. My experience has to do more with that. I think that it's not what not a lot of the members have come from. It's not a lack. It's not a willful ignorance. It's just they don't know it because they've never experienced it. And I look at my father, who just retired as a heavy equipment mechanic, and my little brother's a heavy equipment mechanic, and the amount of work that they have to do with electronics and computers and everything else. Like my father started working as a mechanic in the late 70s, and just the advancement in technology that you had to go through to be able to fix basic equipment now has gone so far that it's a constant evolution of skill. So people just think of turning wrenches or whatnot, but really there is this technological knowledge you have to have now. So I think the trades get undersold in that sense too, because that's evolved as well.
And we've already talked about storytelling. This might be an opportunity for the produce sector to be telling the story about how they're innovating and how the jobs that
and highly skilled
and that they need are not as we imagine them to be.
Yeah.
And this sector is going to play a huge role in what the jobs of the future could look like. Right. And so going back to that positive story, the other thing that the other nuance here when it comes to labor is working with the provinces. And this government's really going to have to do that. And I'm trying to think of
find a way to
do it. Show that there's progress. So whether it's just having ministers pretty much spending their entire week out west, or building bridges in Ontario, making sure that Quebec feels supported and that the rest of the country understands where Quebec's needs fit into all of this. That's going to be important, and maybe that can play out in terms of labor and labor policy.
So let's go global a little. Talk trade, big issue for the sector, no doubt. And I think over the last few years, there's been other periods like this where it seems trade and trade disputes, and I think largely caused by one man in particular, but nonetheless, it has created a lot of uncertainty around trade. We've got, what appears to be CUSMA headed to ratification, although we'll see. I mean, it's a minority government and none of the opposition parties have clearly stated their position yet, but I would be shocked if it doesn't get through Parliament in some form. But we also have trade disputes with China. We've got, as Cam, you mentioned, WTO, issues, and access to those markets outside of Canada. Being able to bring products into Canada, really important. What do you think the government and the opposition parties will prioritize on the trade file, and how might that affect the produce sector going forward?
Well, I think the new NAFTA. I can't call it CUSMA. I'm sorry when I hear that. I think of the power. I think of the power forward for the Lakers, and that upsets me. But yeah, for NAFTA 2.0, I think it's. Honestly, I think it's going to sail relatively easy through the House. I think, obviously, in a minority scenario, it could offer up problems. But I think, given with the Conservative leadership where it's at, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Premier Legault of Quebec basically told the Bloc, back off, don't get in the way of this. So as much as the NDP will have its issues, I think it's going to get through no problem. be relatively drama free. But yeah, I think the thing with trade right now is it's the uncertainty created by the environment that we're in. And you made reference to that one gentleman from the Golden Building in New York. And let's face it, the problem is that we just don't know what's going to happen. And I use the WTO as the example, because you had this structure that's been in place, this dispute mechanism, where the Americans do have to sign off on the judges appointed to the panel. And Mr. Trump just decided, nope, we're not doing that anymore. So now so you think about it, that's where our softwood lumber disputes went. That's where the wine disputes went. That's where all that happened, right? Now you don't have that there. What happens, right? If the Americans decide, okay, well, this Buy Canada food policy you're putting out there to promote is unfairly injuring American products, we're putting a tariff on you. What's your recourse? I think that's part of the problem we run into now is you're in this kind of new space where we don't know where things can go. And somehow, and honestly, the fact that we kind of get sideswiped by other things. I think the one thing where I can give credit to the Prime Minister for on his handling of the international scene in the last little while is that he definitely he's figured out the tone, but also it's been a kind of a reminder of our place in the world that we're not, even though we're a G7 nation, we're not a major power. We only have so many levers we can pull and sticks we can swing without getting major consequences. And I believe in the trade file, that's one place where we've seen that, is that we've kind of been sideswiped by a couple things that I don't know what anyone could have done to avoid it. And I think that's part of where we're at, is that we kind of have to be on our feet and nimble and be ready. Like I know we always talk about the metaphor of living next to Americans as we're the mouse living next to the elephant. And, we always feel every move the elephant makes. But right now the elephant is trying to tap dance on roller skates while tweeting about faucets and toilets and whatever else, right? So you can't help but be on edge at all times and just be waiting to see what happens. And I think right now that's kind of where we're at on the trade file. So we're trying to move what we can move, but at the same time, it's trying to consolidate what we have. When we saw that through NAFTA 2.0.
When Howard, watching the Democratic presidential primary, if let's assume, and I don't think we should assume it, but let's imagine that Donald Trump isn't president after January 2021. Is there anything coming up from the Democrats that should worry or concern the produce sector, or have them thinking about trade and how that the relationship between Canada and the United States?
I would encourage listeners to take a look at the Washington Post article that was published yesterday on the Democrat race and the number of candidates that have visited a farm in Iowa. There's a farmer there that has gained quite a following on regenerative agriculture, and we're going to see a lot more if there is a change in leadership in the United States and we get a Democrat in the House. I think we're going to see a lot more attention paid to agriculture's role in the environmental space. And that is something that Canadian people in the Canadian agri-food sector and in the produce sector in particular, we need to pay close attention to, because there's very clearly a desire there to implement some change in agriculture.
So taking a step back then, looking at what we've talked about three big areas that affect the competitiveness of the sector: trade, sustainability, and climate change and labor. Is there anything else that you see, perking up on the government's agenda, on the opposition party's agendas that might impact the sector, or might be opportunities for the sector to continue, again, tell a different story or insert itself in the debates that are coming up in the next few months?
Well, the biggest risk factor for the agriculture and produce sectors is the 5-year or 10-year review of the Pest Control Products Act. That comes up this year. Typically, the Health Committee takes a look at that. If the government were forced into reopening the statute and having amendments considered, there's a lot of legwork there that the sector needs to be getting ready for, and working with urban-based MPs, both on the government side and on the opposition side, because that's a pretty important piece of legislation for the sector, and being able to get the technology they need to produce the high-quality produce that Canadians are asking for.
Anything else?
Yeah, maybe just to add to what Howard was just saying, there's an opportunity to make policy in this area an all of government type of policy. So, we need the Minister of Ag to work closely with the Minister of Health on a lot of files. And I think the sector really needs to push that and make that clear to this government in order for everyone to be successful. The other thing, sustainability and climate change is going to continue to be at the forefront, and this government will be measured against that. So using that lens will create an opportunity for the sector. And then we can't forget the gender lens, which, this government and this prime minister will continue to be held up against. So if there's some positive and good stories to be told there, I think it's a way to ensure that this government is listening.
Cam, before the last election, there was lots of talk about the development of a food policy, right? That many in the industry voiced concern that looked like it was being run and focused only at Agriculture Canada instead of government-wide. Does the minority parliament situation the government faces, do you suspect, change the trajectory of that policy? Are we likely to see it on the agenda as we go forward?
I think we'll still see it on the agenda because there are other parties that are agreeable to the idea. I think where the opportunity lies, though, is that there are more leverage points to be able to push the discussion where it needs to go. The fact that you have at least two other parties, basically, who will have a say into what this looks like in the end, or could have a say into this, really helps you, gives you other places to go. And to me, I think the whole idea and the approach is to be proactive. At least in my experience, where most problems that arise for any sector when it comes to dealing with government, it's when it's an oversight of something and then you've had an unintended mistake or consequence brought upon the sector that needs to be undone. And the best way to avoid that is to be proactive up front and to be engaged at all levels as quickly as you can be. So when it comes to the food policy, that's my suggestion. Get involved. Reach out to your MPs, make sure they know where you're coming from, and put it out there right away. Because I think the one thing that we need to realize in a minority parliament is that all of a sudden it's not just that government side of the House that matters. Everybody in that chamber now matters, and whether they like to admit it or not all those people in the chamber know everything. They can't.
Right.
So So most MPs I find are very open to learning new things and being introduced to these things and want to hear what you have to say because, frankly, that helps them do a better job.
Is anyone hearing anything in town about the likelihood that this food policy will move forward? Like, we had to put down a wager on whether at the end of, let's say, a 2.5-year mandate that we'll have a food policy in place.
It's in the mandate letter, so
Yes,
that's
it
a
is.
pretty that's a good signal. Will it all come into place over the next 2 years? I don't know, but let's hold them to account and let's make it easy for them to say yes. So how do you do that? Work together. Ensure that you have a coalition that's bigger than just, a handful of producers. That's why this association exists, and just, present that united front. Going back to Cameron's point, get local MPs involved. Use this as an opportunity to teach people about the success of the sector, and let's use that mandate letter to our advantage.
All right. So to wrap up, and I appreciate your time, 2 lightning round, 2 questions. One is, who will be the Conservative Party leader in June? 2, will Justin Trudeau remain Liberal leader into the next election?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. I think after the events of this week, Mr. Trudeau will definitely be leading the Liberals into the next election because I don't think he's afraid of who's coming next. As for who wins, I put my money on Peter MacKay, but I think my safer money is on whoever Richard Descaries decides will be the next leader because he's the one who will have the votes to put someone over the top in the end.
Okay.
Yeah, Trudeau will definitely be the leader going into next election. As for the Conservatives, I assume it's going to be MacKay as well. But there's a lot of time for horse trading and issues and who knows what else to pop up over the next couple of months.
Do you differ, Howard? Come on.
Well, I'll stay with the I think it's a safe bet on the Trudeau entering an election. I'll put another bet on the table, though, and I'm going to predict that the next election will be in the end of May 2022, and I'll put a $2 toonie on the table for that. When it comes to the Conservative leadership, I would only remind you of there's 78 constituencies in Quebec, and 120 odd in Ontario, and whoever can organize those ones will be the next leader. That's what it boils down to. And I think if we can learn anything from the Ontario side, was that an awful lot of Conservatives were surprised to see Doug Ford manage to organize very well across those 120 constituencies. So
that's true.
Awesome. Well, Caitlin McClung, Howard Maines, Cameron Holmstrom, thank you so much for joining us. I also would like to thank Ian for letting me sit in his chair today. It's been a real fun to fill in. My name's David Coletto, and talk to you soon. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again to David, Cameron, Caitlin, and Howard for taking part in that fabulous roundtable discussion. A reminder to head to CPMA/events to learn more about our Farm to Plate advocacy event on the Hill on February 25th. Until next time, fill half your plate with fruits and veggies, continue to seek out new knowledge, and basically never stop growing.